Alright, now we're ready to start sewing your Savannah dress together. So we're in section 1, sewing, and the first thing we need to do is sew all darts in the front and back on both sides. So here's my front piece. I have my dart marked out and I'm going to pin that together so that is ready to sew, and I will do that for all 4 pieces. We also want to sew right sides together, so the front facing pieces to the back facing piece at the shoulders. So here is our back facing piece, and we have our front facing piece. Now just to make sure we don't confuse which side, this is how it will sit on the dress. So we know that these 2 sides go together. So I will just quickly pin these. And this facing then goes to the other side. And they will be ready to sew. So just to double check there, we're sewing across the shoulder seams. Sew the pocket facing to the pocket lining. So here is our lining and our facing. So I will flip that over and sew this edge together. So you can pin that. Sew the front hem facing pieces to the back hem facing pieces at the side seams. So I've just got my facings here. Now you can see that I've actually made mine a little bit higher, and no other reason in that I'm just going to make this dress a little bit shorter, and I'm going to take some off the bottom there. So just ignore that for now, that you don't need to change your pattern pieces. So here's my center back. This is my back hem facing. And here is my front hem facings. This is center front. So I need to take this side seam here and attach it to the back. And I will sew this edge together. So this is the side seam. I'm going to flip this over and sew to this side of the back facing. So I'm getting all of this ready now, and then I will take the whole lot to my sewing machine and sew the whole lot. And then we need to sew the underarm seam in the shoulder. So I'm going to bring these 2 pieces together, right sides together, and I will sew that seam as well, obviously on both shoulders. On both sleeves, I should say. And so that is all of the sewing that I am doing right now in section 1. I'll get all of that ready, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about what we're going to iron. Now that we've finished sewing all the pieces in section 1, we're up to section 1 ironing. So the first thing we need to do is press all the darts towards the center. So with our front pieces, this is our side seam, so we need to press the dart towards center front. And on the back, fold this open. And here are our side seams, and we're going to press both darts towards the center. With the neck line and back facing, these seams need to be pressed open on both sides. And on the pocket lining, 2 pieces these pieces also need to be, or these seams rather, also need to be pressed open on both pieces. You've got some ironing to do if you're using the patch pocket. On the sleeves, this underarm seam also needs to be pressed open. And then once you've pressed this open, you can go ahead and fold up the bottom edge by 1 centimeter and press, and then fold it up again by about, well, not by about, I'm eyeballing it, but that is about 2.5 centimeters. So you're going to press that seam or that fold in as well. On the hem facing, at the side seams that we have just sewn together, these seams need to be pressed open on both sides and on this side. And also with the top hem facing, you can go ahead and fold the top over by 1 centimeter and press if you are not using the bias binding. And if you are not using the bias binding, you will also do the same on the front facing. I'll turn it around this way. So if you're not using bias binding, you need to use this, take this edge, fold it under and press 1 centimeter all the way around. The next step is to pin the pocket bag linings to the front dress pieces, and then we will finger press the seam towards the pocket lining and understitch, which I'll go into when we get these pocket bags on. So I've got my dress front and we're working on the side that we have finished the seam, and we are using the pocket bag lining, which is the plain piece. So not the piece that has the two sections together, that will go on the back of the dress. These are going on the front of the dress. So we can line these up with the markings. You can pin those in place on both sides. Now we're using a 1 centimeter seam allowance through the dress, but to do these pocket bags, we want to use something a little bit smaller to sew this pocket bag to the dress, so that the seam joining the pocket bag to the dress sits inside the side seam. So I would suggest using something around 7 to 8 millimeters. And on the back of the dress, we are now using the lining that is in 2 pieces. And we want right sides together, and we'll match up our notches, pin that in place, and the same as the front, we're going to stitch along here. Then we will open this out, and while you're still at the sewing machine, we'll finger press and then just do a little understitch, just a couple of mil away from the seam on the pocket bag side, and you're also catching all of the seam allowance behind it as you sew. Once you have done that, you will pin the dress front and the dress back together, so the shoulder seams, and then around the side of the dress, around the pocket and down. Also, if you are just finishing the neck and back facing, you can go ahead and top stitch that folded edge under now. If you're going to use the bias binding, you can now also at the machine sit with your bias binding, and you're going to finish the edge along the facing on the inside edge. So around the whole back facing, down the other side, and at the same time you can do your hem facing. Just remember, with your hem facing, you want to do the top of the hem facing, so that'll be the upside of the curve, And you can do the whole edge now with your bias binding. So like I said, you would do all of this at the sewing machine, but I just wanted to show you that I have sewn my pocket bag onto the side seam of the dress. There is my stitching line. And then at the machine, just open that pocket bag out. You want to fold over the seam allowance and you literally press it with your fingers. So you fold that edge open, press it down, and then you would top stitch 1 to 2 mil along that edge. And I have gone ahead and done that with the other pieces that I have. So hopefully you can see that line of stitching just along here. And that helps the pocket sit nicely inside once we sew that side seam together. So once you have done all 4 pockets, you can stay at the machine and you're going to pin your front pieces to the back at the shoulder seams. Make sure you've got them around the right way. So pin your shoulder seams together, stitch across the shoulder with both pieces, both sides, and then you will come down to the side of the dress and you will open it out. And starting from this shoulder seam, you will start to stitch down this side seam and your pocket bags will be laid away from the dress. And you will continue that side seam all the way down, then go around the pocket bags, both pocket bag linings together, come back up into the dress, and then continue down the side seam all the way to the hem. And you will do that on both sides, and that will be putting your whole dress together in one piece. Again, you stay at the machine if you are doing the bias binding. And I'm just going to show my back and neck facing here. And I just wanted to highlight with the facing. Normally when you get facing, one side is slightly shorter than the other side. You want the shorter side to be on top, the side that's going to show and the side that you'll be looking at when you stitch. And that just helps this longer side at the back make sure that you actually catch the back as you stitch along. So I tend to put bias binding on as I sew. I find it easier that way. So I will start the bottom edge, I'll start stitching and I'll just keep running that bias binding along the edge. When you do get to curves, like around the back facing, you can stretch your bias binding just a little bit. You won't need to do it much, but just a little bit to help it sit nice and flat on that curve. Once I've done the neck facing, I'm still at the machine. You haven't left the machine yet. I will do the same with my hem facing. And just remember which side is the top and which side is the bottom. It curves up. So this side at the top is the side that will have the bias binding all the way along. And the very last step in this section is to just stitch down your hem on your sleeves. Now once this is pressed, generally speaking I don't pin that down, I just make sure it sits flat as I sew. So up to you how you're going to do that, but you're just going to stitch on this inside edge about 1 to 2 millimeters on the inside. Once you have sewn the hem on your sleeve, you can go ahead and sew some gathering stitches just between these 2 notch points. So you want to set your machine to the longest stitch possible. For me it's a 5, and I suggest doing 2 rows of gathering stitches. Okay, so we're going to move on to the ironing now, but before we do, I'd just like to show you how the bias binding turned out on my facing. It just is gorgeous. I love these colors together. Alright, so in this step, if you've done the patch pocket, you're pressing that flat, and we're going to press flat the side seams in the dress. So I'm up here in the armhole, and you want to open this out and press that side seam open all the way down. Now, because we have the the side seam pocket here, we just need to make a little snip to open that up. So the side seam pocket is going to face towards the front. So this side of the side seam, when we press it open on the front side, that's already going to be facing the right way, but we need to open the back side seam out. And all we're going to do is just, with our scissors, bring your scissor right and clip right up to that stitching line where you turned the corner, and then you'll be able to open this side seam flat as you press it down. And you need to make that little cut. You're just going through one layer there at the top of the pocket, and also again at the bottom of the pocket. So this will all be sewn open all the way up. This is the bottom side seam of the dress, and at the base of the pocket on the back side, you're just going to make a little snip. You'll find where the pivot point, the corner is, where you came around the pocket and you pivoted to come back down. Just a little snip up towards that pivot. You don't want to cut through your stitching, but you can cut quite close, and then you'll be able to fold that side seam open and iron it flat. We're also going to iron flat your shoulder seams, so just press those open. Okay, we're now up to section 3 sewing, and we're going to be attaching the neckline facing and also the hem facing. So we're going to start pinning right sides together, but we need to start at center back. So I've got my 2 shoulder seams here, and I'm just going to put them together to find my center back. Just make sure you don't stretch this as you're doing it. So I'm just going to place a pin there. And I'm going to do the same on my neckline facing. Use the 2 shoulder seams, bring those together, and fold that out to find center back. Okay, now with right sides together, I'm going to join the neckline or the back facing to the dress at center back, and I'm going to also work around with my shoulder seams. So shoulder seam in the facing, line that up with the shoulder seam on the dress, and pin, and I'll do the same on the other side. Now generally I don't use a lot of pins, so I'll just find key places like these shoulder seams and notches, and if it's a short section I can see when I'm at my machine where I'm sewing. So down through the front I'm going to line up this curve, and I'll pin all the way down the front of the dress. So we're down here at the hem, and I could have ironed that to make it a bit better. So I'll line this up and pin that on. Now before I sew this on, I am actually going to have my back hem facing on as well. So I'm going to do the same thing, working along the bottom of the dress. I will find the center back. I've got my 2 side seams. So this is the bottom of the dress. Line those side seams up, find the center back. Just put a marker. And with my hem facing, I'll do the same. Now my bias binding will be the top, so I need to work on the bottom. So here's the 2 side seams. There's the center. And right sides together, I'll pin the center back. I'll also come up and pin next at the side seams to make sure they're lined up nicely. and I just want to show you the front. So what we're going to do here, when we sew the neck facing on, which is first, is we're going to have the back hem facing sitting over the top. And when we stitch down the front of the hem facing, you can stitch straight over the top, you will pivot and just stitch out a little bit. And then that way, when we go to turn the facing to the right side, I'll just see if I can show you. When it goes to the inside, this neckline facing will sit over the top of your hem facing. When you do come to your machine to sew, I do suggest starting, it might be easier to show you here, starting at the center back and sewing down your hem, pivot, and just come out a little bit, and then repeat the same process on the other side so that you're starting from the top of the dress and sewing down. Once you have sewn that and you sew your hem facing, again, I recommend starting at center back of the dress and sewing out to where you stopped your stitching on the neck facing. Okay, once you have sewn down your neck and hem facing, you can put your sleeve in. Now normally I would still be sitting at my sewing machine after sewing this down and putting my sleeve in, but I have broken it into 2 steps, so I don't have pins everywhere while I show you this. So just make sure you've got the right sleeve for each side of the dress. The 2 notches in the sleeve go to the back. So you'll have your sleeve right side out and the dress will be inside out. So I'm just going to line the top notch here. You can see I got a little dot there as well with my cut because it's a bit hard to see. And pin those together. And then your lower seam on your sleeve will match up with your side seam in the underarm. And then you can match your side, the notches there, so with the dress and my sleeve, and I'll pin at that notch. And on the other side with the double notches. And then you just need to adjust your gathering to fit into the dress. Now my machine, as I've sewn those longer stitches, it starts to gather my fabric anyway, and it's actually a little bit too gathered to fit in here. So we do want it to fit nicely without any gathering. So you just need to adjust that until you have them the same length, and I would spend a little bit more time on this, but then you will pin and then you can sew around. And I would sew with the sleeve side down as you're easing that sleeve to fit onto the dress. Once you have sewn your sleeves in, we need to finish that raw edge. So you can use the serger or you can use a zigzag, whatever you prefer, on both sides. And I also suggest finishing the edge inside that back and neck facing. You're not going to see the raw edge when the dress is finished. The facing will sit to the inside over the top, and you'll have buttonholes and buttons holding it down. But I just like to prevent this fabric from fraying, so I do suggest that you finish that edge as well. Now what we're going to get ready to do is to understitch your facings. So I'm just going to put this section together. You want to sew all your seam allowances towards the facing, along the front, around the neck, over the back, and along the hem. And then you can take your dress to the machine and you're going to sew just inside the seam allowance. I'll show you from the back. So if I've pressed this seam allowance towards my facing, you're just going to sew a couple of millimeters in from where you did your original seam line. And that's just going to help once you turn your facings to the inside, it's going to help them sit flat. Now, because I have tried to save time moving from the iron and the sewing machine with the construction of this dress, and I'm only suggesting this if you feel 100% comfortable doing it, you don't necessarily need to iron your seam allowance to the facing first. Like the pockets, you can finger press it. And I tend to do that as I'm sewing. But I do only recommend you do that if you feel 100% comfortable. Once you've sewn this understitching all the way around, we're going to press it flat. But I just wanted to show you quickly, you can see I haven't ironed this or anything, and I've just literally just folded this to the inside, and you can already see just how nice that sits all by itself. It is rolling a little bit too far, and so I will just sort of move that to the outside a little bit more when I press it. But press your facings all the way around. And what we're looking at this step is your hem, because we're about to sew your hem in place. So line up your hem, press that down. And before you do, I also recommend using a point turner or something like that to make your corner nice and sharp. Which you needed to miter as well. And then once you have this pressed into place, again up to you with the pins, I would still definitely pin at the seams so that they all line up nicely, and just put a couple in there to stop it from dragging. But you can go ahead and sew your hem down. I would sew just below the bias binding that already has a seam on it, just to keep it nice and clean, all the way across the bottom, and we're almost finished. Once you've stitched down your hem, you're ready to give your whole dress a really good press and get it ready for doing your button and your buttonholes. I'm not going to do a tutorial on the buttons or the buttonholes, but I am just going to show you. I only have 2 of these left. I'm waiting for a new order of these buttons, and this is what I'll be using on this dress. I'm pretty sure I use these on my pineapple print Savannah, but yeah, these are the buttons I'm going to use. And once you've done your buttons, you have a beautiful Savannah dress ready for summer.